way
Sorry.
we should continue to proceed. All right, then on to the agenda. We have, you notice that I moved the minutes to the end of the meeting because that's, and both Matt and Sean and anyone who's on are free to stay for our approval of the minutes, but I thought we should get into the applications first. So we have two items on the agenda, one having to do with building one of the Butterfield development, and the second is a referral to us. We provide comments if we have any on the reformatting of the historic district map, which the HDRB submitted to the trustees on December 12, and which at that point started a 63-day clock running in terms of the trustees' response to it. So I'm sure that they're interested in any comments that we have. Sean is here to answer any questions if we have. So let's turn to Butterfield, if I could, because I have been trying to play catch up on the history of all of this, and I know Yaslin has as well. And it is complicated, it is lengthy, and there was an exhaustive review process on this whole project. It's my understanding, so Matt or board members, correct me if I'm wrong in my description of where we stand. We are dealing here with a change of use in building one, as yet unbuilt, but approved under the agreement reached on Butterfield. It is a change of use which does not involve any change of footprint or design or materials, and hence does not involve the HDRB except in a negative declarative sense, if that is actually a function of HDRB or process. The proposed change of use is to eliminate the office part of building one, leaving the retail use in building one unchanged in its size, square footage, or location within the building, and substituting for the office space 6 residential units that had been previously approved for the larger site, but were not built. So if this project goes ahead and when it is completed, the quota of senior housing units that was approved will have been reached. And the change of use does, as far as I understand, again, not require any exterior changes. The interior reconfigurations are a matter of building code and housing code and the like. And so again, I think not within this board's purview. The impact that is, I think, the major impact that's been identified that would flow from this change is a change in the parking table and the number of spaces. And I would, at this point, like, without, well, first of all, let me say, are there any corrections so far from my fellow board members in what my understanding is of this?
Well, a change of use really doesn't have anything to do with any modifications to the building. I think what you're delineating there is obviously doesn't need to go to the historic review board for architectural review because they're in the district, right? And Matt Moran has decided to, in working with Charlotte and in his communications to us, has said they don't want to go to the HDRB. And so they're going to eliminate the parking. They're not going to change anything on the exterior of the building. So the change of use is just that, just the allowed uses in the zone. Obviously, senior housing is allowed. The B4A allowed up to 55 units. They built 49. So it would seem to follow that an additional 6 units are as of right. And that's what they're talking about, is eliminating the second floor office space and swapping that out for senior housing. I would not go so far as to say it's just a change to the parking table. There is a shared parking plan there that all those spaces are part of.
I understand that, and that's what I'm going to say, other than the parking issue, which I'm going to ask Matt to explain. But
if I could if we could just use last names for the Matts, or I'll be Matthew if you want.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Our Matt and his Matt. Okay. We will.
Okay.
You're Matthew. All right. So
yeah, I'll be Matthew.
All right. Well, Matthew, thank you for the confirmation, because that's how I had read it as well. So with that understanding, Matt Moran, if you could please take the board through what the proposal is regarding parking.
Right. I mean, I think between Jack and Matt, you summarized it pretty much perfectly. To clarify what Matt Francisco had said is, yes, it's not just rentals, apartment rentals, it's senior apartment rentals. They have to meet the same criteria as senior housing.
Rentals or condominiums?
These are apartment rentals.
Oh.
Yep.
Oh, okay. I did not know that. Didn't make any representation. Go ahead, please.
Yep. So they're senior housing units, but they're apartments. And these units, when you replace the apartments with the office space, you end up with a net of 18 parking spaces. And there is parking within the garages, the 2 buildings, for the 55 condominium units, but they're not going to be have the same rights and privileges. They won't be part of the condominium association. They will not be parking in those garages. So there's actually a net of 24 spaces. And, that's when you take the credit of 1 per 300 for square footage of office space, and then you compare it to the 1 per unit for the apartments. So you end up, by assigning an additional 6 spaces, giving everyone another space outside, that would give us a net from what the approved plan had for office space of 18 spaces.
Okay. So when you say a net, what you're saying is that there are 18 more spaces than are required?
Yes, 18 more than are required, but that also considers 6 spaces outside for the tenants. And so you still end up having a net of 18 versus if we went with the office scheme.
Okay, now, thank you. Are there any questions about what Matt Moran has just described to us? Okay.
My only question, and this is maybe more for Matthew, what changes, how does that change things now that it's rentals and not condos? And does that have an impact?
No, that's a great question. I'd have to look at the B4A. The way I was a trustee when the B4A was written, it was for senior housing condominium. The only right for rental was if the market was so weak, the owner was allowed to rent the units out, right? But they were supposed to attempt to sell first. So I don't know. I think that's a good question, and I think that's a legal question as to this use. Senior housing, It would all depend. It would all depend on the legal interpretation of how the B4A was written. Matt Moran obviously believes, and Paul Glero, the owner, obviously believes that it's an as of right use. Is that correct, Matt?
Yes,
Okay.
there were a few conversations with the attorney, Mr. First. And, this has been going back a year or so because we were saying, hey, can we get NYP or someone? But there's no
New York
market.
Presbyterian, the hospital.
Yeah, there's no, it's not an aggressive market for office space right now. Every half the population is
We're all at
working
home.
from home. So, but we still thought that they would want to do something. So Matt will tell you, I made him crazy because we were doing
I can attest to
apartments,
that.
and then we said, let's go to NYP.
Oh, there was hotels in there. There was a lot of things in there.
And went back and forth, and now we settled that this option. And
if I could just stop you there, Yasmin, did you have any other question? Was that the only question? I'm sorry, I wanted to make sure we got Matt's feeling on this, because obviously a lot of this is, well, what do you think, right?
Yeah. The only other question I had was just, Matt, when you were talking about, even though there's additional parking for, garage spaces that could potentially be used, that the renters won't be able to use that. Does that have to do with those spots are deeded somehow to owners of the condos? And so,
we just don't want to mix apples and oranges. You have an association that, they have their private parking that's below the garage, and it's set up in the bylaws.
Yes, and I'm not sure how familiar you are with it, but all the parking is underground.
Matthew.
Yes.
Okay. If you have something to say, just raise your hand, because I don't want conversations going all over the place here. So just hold off for a second. Yaslin, was that question was directed at Matt Moran, correct?
Yes.
That last question. All right. So
yes.
Can you answer it?
Yeah. So our stepping back a little bit from our conversations with Mr. First and from our interpretation and our attorney's interpret, you can look through the B4A zoning. Nowhere does it say condominiums. It talks about senior housing units. Okay, so we stand by that. We don't think that's an issue.
Okay, so we have some work to do in reaching out to Mr. First to go back and find out what the actuality is of what's permitted and what's not. So we will do that.
Okay.
Okay, we will do that. But now, Matt, returning to you about the overall parking plan that you identified earlier on in your comments. Can you explain that, please?
I don't know.
No, that was to Matthew Francisco.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, please repeat it.
Yeah, you had mentioned that there was an overall parking plan that this change of use needed to be measured against. And can you go back and explain what you mean by that? What was the overall parking plan that you think is being affected?
It's the parking plan. When you do a site plan review and when you sign off on a site plan, part of it is a parking plan. That's all we're talking about.
Right.
What I was trying to explain to Yasmin when she was asking the question was that the condominium parking is underground, that it has it's restricted. So, you would have access to a garage as condominium owners.
Right.
That was all very clear. The planning board had the ability to reduce parking in two ways. They had the ability to go down to one space per unit for condominiums or senior housing. And then they also had the ability to reduce parking requirements up to 20% based on proving shared parking. And shared parking is basically, the best example of shared parking, although it's one that doesn't work, is Food Town, right? Food Town was approved on shared parking. Shared parking works when one end is a grocery store and the other end is a nightclub or a bowling alley, right? Because, you provide parking for both, but yet one side wouldn't even really be using it at the business hours of the other one. So Butterfield was approved based with a 20% reduction to create shared parking. The units were approved at 1 space per unit. They went down to the bare minimum of 1 space per unit. They're not required to do 1 space per unit. They're legally allowed. The planning board, Barney Malloy's planning board, was allowed to do that. That's what they chose to do. So now what you have is all the parking out in the open is part of a shared parking plan, right? So you can't really talk about net. You have to visit. First of all, as far as I can tell in the EIS, shared parking was never proven to be effective. They basically just applied it. Does that sound right to you, Matt? I mean, there was no study that proved shared parking that is anywhere in the EIS that I can find.
You know, I don't recall.
Yeah,
It's been
exactly. It's
5
been a long
years.
time. It may not be a fair question right now. It's been a long time, right? So anyway, the way it works when you do shared parking, and the way it works is that you have to prove that shared parking will work. So what you're talking about is it isn't as simple as saying, well, there's 18 less required because they're condominiums. First of all, what Matt is using is a unit of 1 space per unit, right? And that's a 2-bedroom rental, Matt?
We have 1s and 2 bedrooms, but regardless, it's 1 per unit.
So they're using 1 per unit. The planning board has the ability to do the normal code, which is 2 per unit. We certainly have a lot of experience in the village as to how well 1 per unit works. And so the condominiums were all approved on 1 per unit. There are 49 units over there, parking spaces for them. It is likely that a lot of those owners have more than 1 vehicle and are parking outside in the shared parking. That was never calculated, but the prior board never calculated that overflow. So then it's not as simple as to say that if you take the retail away and then replace it with rental, right, that then you just get to net out a number. It doesn't work that way, because what you're doing is you're then taking those 6, I would say 12. I think a 2-bedroom unit needs 2 parking spaces. I don't think that the 1 per unit was correct. We have to be very careful that we can't overreach this application. The approvals that are in place are all in place, no question, right? But so the parking table, you have to first look at the shared parking plan and look at the impacts to the shared parking plan. And then there are certain site conditions that I think we need to look at as well. I was surprised to see that the first 4 spaces on both of the driveway aprons are back in only, right? First of all, I don't know how you back in off of a busy road into a parking space, but that's the adjacent parking, right, to this. So we need to see where, on a site plan, we need to see from Matt where they're planning to. I would imagine too that you're going to mark these spaces and say reserved for the apartment owners, correct?
No, not necessarily.
You just leave them to fight for, well, I guess if they're rentals, I would assume that on a condominium, but I guess you could do that for a rental.
Wait, I'm getting a little bit lost here.
I just think we're going backwards here, okay?
All right, Matt
Yeah.
Moran, may I please speak here? We are dealing with a situation where approvals have been made. And whether or not we now think that those approvals should not have been made is irrelevant. There was call it a deal, there was an understanding that was reached after very significant public debate on this, and under which this project has been going forward ever since. I think that what we have to do is treat those agreements as a reality. And if the project developer wishes to provide inadequate parking for his clients, his tenants, then he's got a marketing problem, and the market ought to operate as such. What I want to understand is that there are requirements of certain spaces for hospital use, for office use, for the post office, I assume, and that these have been factored into the total number of spaces which were approved. Now, I don't see signs when I go over there saying, you know, post office parking only, medical parking only, housing parking only. I don't see that anywhere within the site. So that I'm assuming that these additional parking spaces, however they're configured, are going to be treated the same way. And so for me, the question is, what is the impact of this change of use that is within our ability to change?
Well, if I could speak to this a bit, the, you know, I know the B4A was kind of created zone. You could look at the zoning for senior housing from years ago, before the B4A was created, and it was 1 per unit. And, you know, the arguments made, I know the people in those buildings. Yeah, some people might have 2 cars. I got people that can barely walk. I've got many of these people are 70 to 80 years old that occupy these residences, okay? And they have 1 car, okay? And we have a lot of parking outside that's also assigned to residential. And like you said, we're kind of going backwards now. This is what was already, you know, approved. What is the, you know, we've kind of done an unofficial survey of the people in there, and they've said, look, we would prefer housing in that building rather than bringing more office retail space into the site. Okay, that's kind of an unofficial thing, but the way we look at it is you reduce 9,000 square feet of office space, you put in six senior housing units, which is what the code says. It doesn't say condominiums, apartments, townhouses, nothing like that. Okay, there's a whole criteria for that. So, and our position is it's a win-win. But everyone, some people on this board know this has been a long path, long. I've been involved from day one, and we're tired. If you guys aren't interested in this, it's fine. We're just gonna put in the office retail space. We just can't take it anymore.
Well,
We're done.
Matt, really, I just have to say that you're not doing yourself any favors in going back and raising something which I don't wish to discuss as the chair of this board. What I want to discuss is not the past, but the present, and compliance with the agreement that was reached between Butterfield Development and the village of Cold Springs. So I don't think we have reached a point of threats of, you know, walking away from a discussion that need not take place. I am simply interested in a change of use that appears to be as of right, and a condition of parking that appears to be in keeping with the agreement, not with perhaps with what should have been the agreement, but the agreement. And that is the agreement. And whether or not this board can provide advice to the trustees that this should go forward, apparently, with little negative impact to anyone. Your relations with your condo owners are not our business.
Yep.
Okay? And your relations with any of your tenants is not our business. As long as they are legal and meet whatever requirements there are. So
Right.
let's not go broad and backwards in our conversations. Okay,
Yeah, sounds good.
comments, please.
Yeah, just to be clear, I mean, that is exactly what I was saying, is that all these approvals stand. But you know, very similar, and why this feels the same, Matt, is because it is the same, right? Which is that the planning board is bound by the code. So we can't go beyond the four corners of your application. That's all we're doing. We're just looking at that, right? So
Mhm.
everything that stands, stands. There's no question, right? But it is our job, it is our duty to, you know, to look at this applications within the four corners of the B4A. That's all we're saying. And that requires certain steps and processes that we have to go through. That's all.
Mhm.
And which we are going through, but they are narrow processes that we are going through. The agreement that was reached voluntarily by both parties here has set the requirements within the B4A. It defines it so that issues that might be attendant to another B4A are no longer live issues within the boundaries of this one. Okay, that at least is my view, and I will take that as well as this, you know, to look at this issue of whether rental units are permitted as of right or not. And I'll take those to John first to get the facts on them. Okay. And
Yep.
I will inform all of you of my findings, or John can do a brief memo for us and answer the questions. But does anyone have a question now related to this, to the issue that we have before us, which is the change of use, okay, as an as of right action under this B4?
Not without reviewing the code again. It had never occurred to me in the prior conversations with Matt, these were always a condominium, you know, and so, there was talk about it was too complicated to amend a current condominium plan, so it would be its own condominium. So obviously rental is different than the other piece that, you know, as far as the as of right is its impacts on the shared parking plan that already exists,
Okay,
and whether
well-
or not those parking spaces are going to be reserved or not. But then obviously we all know that similar to, you know, to 40 Main is that, you know, there is this short trip parking concept, and then there is this, well, I'm parked for the day. You could park even longer when you're in a rental apartment, you know, and you know, work in the city or go on vacation, right? So it's a very different impact to the parking plan, the uses.
Okay,
Right.
well, so all right, I think we now have a set of questions. Okay, that's what I was trying to get to.
Yep.
And we will get to a set of answers by our next meeting on these so that we can discuss them and make a decision on our opinion of them, if possible. If not, it may take a little longer, but I now have a better sense, honestly, than I did walking into this meeting, despite my briefings and everything, which were all extremely good and thorough. Okay. So, all right, that's where we are. Marie, you have a question or want to say something?
Yes, in the application online, it states that building one will have underground parking for the residents. And also in the application online, it says the retail square footage for retail will be decreased from 6,000 square feet to 5,000 square feet. So something's happening with floor
I
one.
think that's I'm sorry. That might be the second to last application.
It
Something
is.
that, yeah.
Oh. Okay.
I did confirm with Matt Moran and the Village Hall that the materials that were going to be posted for this meeting were the latest and best materials. The underground parking was part of an earlier iteration of this, which did include a restructuring, a reconfiguration of the building, and which would have involved the Historic District Review Board. That is no longer the case. So I will check again to make sure that those materials are the latest and the best. And if they need to be revised, they'll be revised.
Thank you. That was a good call out, because I read the same thing as you did, Marie. So, and that was the material I received just recently. So thank you for
Okay.
taking that, Jack.
Okay.
Yeah, on the original site plan approval, we're going to be doing exactly what the original site plan approval called for, except for the use. There was talk that there was an interim application where we said maybe we'll give each person a garage, an underground garage, and it just didn't make sense in the end. So.
And that was, I did see that in the last meeting that Matthew chaired, that I saw on this issue, which was back in September. That was at that point the stage of the proposal, but it has changed. All right, I will try again to make sure that what everyone is looking at online is in fact the latest and best information. And the minutes will show the questions that have been brought up that need answering. We will have answers to them, I hope, by our next meeting. Yeah.
One quick question. So Matt, in looking at the site, I noticed the first 4 spaces at both driveway aprons are restricted as back in only. Who did that? Was it DOT or was it?
I don't recall who, but it ended up on the site plan. Yes, that they wanted back in only spaces, but I don't recall if it was a DOT requirement or if it was a planning board requirement.
Yeah, just I can't imagine coming in off a main road and then backing in at the apron.
Yeah, but you could be coming through the project, the other location too, and then backing in.
Backing towards an apron?
No, you could be coming through the other side of the site. No, let's say you're, both, they're in and outs.
Gentlemen, this is
Right.
this is
Okay.
off topic. So
Well, no, actually it's not. The reason I'd like to know is just to know whether or not there's any flexibility in those, because that restricts their use, right? And if you if you can kind of open those up to say, oh, those are for these rental units, or, but if.
okay. Another question. Those were the only signs I noticed, directional signs in that sense, except for handicap, throughout the site. So we'll see why they were picked out. Okay. All right. Village of Cold Spring.
Sorry, I have to get that changed. Matt Moran, the online documentation says that the first floor retail is changing from 6,000 square feet to 5,000 square feet. Is that also incorrect?
That's incorrect. That's the application from last year. We're building exactly the same footprint, the exact same square footage of the whole building, the exact same square footage of the retail, same elevations that were approved by the Historic District Review Board. The only change is going to be the top 2 floors that were office would become apartments.
One last question about taxation. The buildings that currently contain the senior units are taxed as condos. How will the new building be taxed? Totally as non-condos?
I'm not that familiar with how things are taxed in the town, but I know that there will be apartments, there'll be senior housing apartments. You may recall, we never did this pilot, a payment in lieu of taxes. We're paying fair, market rate, whether it be for a condominium or an apartment. But I don't really know if there's a difference between the two or how it's taxed, but yeah.
between taxation of condos and taxation of non-condos. Since the entire building would be non-condos now, I would assume it would be taxed at full valuation with
Yeah.
whatever the tax rate is. Okay.
Yeah,
Not,
and the ground,
not,
right, and the ground floor is still retail.
Okay, another question, Marie, and we will try and get an answer to that one as well. All right, Matt, thank you very much
Okay,
for your time. And we will put this back on the agenda in 2 weeks.
yes, that's good.
Okay, where we hope that some of these questions at least can be answered and discussed and perhaps put to rest, but perhaps not. Okay,
Okay, thank
all
you.
right. Thank you.
Yep, good night.
Good night. Sean, are you with us? Hey, Sean.
Guys,
Thank you for holding on there.
no problem.
The next item on the agenda is a proposal, a recommendation from the HDRB to reformat the map, excuse me, of the historic districts of Cold Spring, and also a slight modification to one of the properties that is partially within the district. And this is being carried out in cooperation or as part of a larger process of unifying design guidelines carried out in cooperation with the State Historic Preservation Office, and in the code having to do with changing maps of historic districts for changing or adding or removing properties. The HDRB was asked by the village board to go through the formal process of holding a public hearing, which they did do, and submitting their recommendations to the trustees. As I mentioned earlier, they did on December 12th. We're required, not required, but the trustees have referred this to us for comments. And our comments now go directly to the Board of Trustees. The process is essentially closed in terms of the HDRB's responsibility for it. And so let me just turn it over to you, Sean, and you can give a brief history, but more importantly is actually a description of the substantial changes of the reformatting and that piece of property that's.
Sure. Just to clarify, the change to the design guidelines is a separate project from this reformatting of the map. There's one does affect the other, but the map doesn't prevent us from moving forward with the design guidelines or vice versa, just so those two things aren't linked together. But as Jack mentioned, we, starting last February, we started working with a GIS technician from the county tax office to reformat the map to be more visually in line with their system. And so future zoning maps and other maps that are produced for the village by that office will all match each other up. The major sort of goal of the project was to make sure that our map was in line with tax lots and existing property ownership. There were a couple of areas in previous iterations of the map where a boundary went through a property, and since our last interpretation of the map in 1999, some properties have been subdivided and have changed. So that was the kind of major driving factor behind this. The map, which was filed with the legislation creating our historic district, will not change. That will stay on the record in Albany as being our official map. It's a hand-drawn map from 1976. But this map, which we sent to all of you, the green map, we'll call it, is the latest interpretation of that map. So it will replace the blue and gold map. And to Jack's other comment, the reason why the new map is a uniform color and doesn't distinguish between the local district and national district is because the State Historic Preservation Office has encouraged boards like ours to treat all of the properties under their jurisdiction the same, essentially, and not to distinguish between locally designated and state or national designated landmarks unless there's a reason to distinguish because of their architecture or anything like that. We're not in one of those situations. We simply just have a smaller portion of our overall historic district, which has been put on the National Register. But architecturally speaking, there isn't much of a distinction between our local and national district. So that's why the map is all one color. If anybody has any questions, and again, our process is done and we've submitted our report to the trustees. So any comments that the planning board has, I can answer any questions if anybody has any questions, but any comments from this board will be given to the trustees to aid in their decision whether or not to adopt the new map as the map of record. So I don't know if anybody has any questions about the map or the process or any of the subject properties. I can answer those for you. We are required to send it to you. You are not required to make any comments if you guys don't care. But that's just what's written in chapter 64 of the code, is that we're required to send a copy to you.
Okay, well, I have one question and one comment.
Sure.
The question is, I understand the desire to remove the sliver of the site at the corner of Benedict and Marion,
Sure.
because I think split designation, split zone designations on a piece of property are not a good idea. But I did notice on the map that there are two other sites behind that one where the sort of same physical situation exists that head down the hill to, I guess it's Kemble down there. And so I was just wondering why the same remedy wasn't applied to them.
Well, I believe that it was applied. Let me open my copy of the map just to make sure I'm remembering correctly. But there were some items on there were a couple of lots in this specific area. This is the area behind Food Town. That there were some lots which were bisected by the boundaries of the district. Since 1999, a lot of those properties have been further subdivided. So our proposed map removes the properties which are no longer in the district so that they are all treated the same. I'm looking at the map right now, Jack, and it doesn't, the boundaries, it might look a little funny because of the way that those lots have been subdivided, but the boundary of the map itself, those are in line with existing lot lines.
Okay.
So it's number 5 and number 7, Benedict, are lots. They're two separate lots, but they're separated. One's actually in front of the other on the street. It's a family that owns, it's 2 generations. So yeah, so again, none of the boundaries, even though it might not look like it, none of the boundaries on the updated map bisect any existing tax lots.
Okay, thank you. And my comment is, and I haven't quite in my own mind, and I'd be interested in the other board members' views on this, is that I guess despite the prevailing thinking up in the State Historic Preservation Office about removing the boundary distinctions between a National Register or state historic district from the local district, strikes me as something that we need to think about, only because there is, as you know, a separate regulatory process that applies to the National Register District under certain circumstances of federal action or federal permit or federal financing.
Sure.
That does not apply to the local district. And so a property owner who is both in the Federal Register District and the local district, if they don't know that when they buy the property, it's a surprise, I think, that I'm not sure that a property owner needs to undergo should all of a sudden the village apply for, federal money to do something. There is the process, as you know, for the sake of the other board members, it's called the 106 process, which requires mitigation by a federal agency if its activities are going to negatively affect properties on the National Register. So there is an extra potential layer of enforcement, and I'm not sure that it's actually doing anyone a service to completely ignore that on the map.
So we actually, in addition to this map, we're going to have a narrative breakdown of all of the tax lots, and it'll be a sort of spreadsheet where you can search by address to see which lots are in the district, and on that breakdown, it will distinguish between National Register district, local district, and any individual landmarks for that very reason. The most common sort of like, basic homeowner relationship that anyone has with the National Register district is for the purpose of tax credits for rehabilitation tax credits for historic properties. We are not in a census district that makes anybody eligible for those tax credits. So our entire zip code and census tract is not able to take advantage of those. So knowing that that would sort of be the most common way that any of our individual property owners would ever sort of have to interact with the National Register, we decided that it would be something which we could still have a record of and still provide to people, but most people are generally looking at the map to see whether they're in or they're out, and whether a project that they are witnessing elsewhere in the village is in or out. We have people who ask us about things. I've had many people ask me about the art studio going up on Fair Street, which I think is a great, interesting project, but that was not something that we reviewed. And there have been some other residential, changes to residences up and down the village. So as far as the Section 106 process is concerned, that's something which comes into play if there is a building which is on the register or is deemed eligible for the register, which is receiving public money for any sort of a project beyond a certain scope. They need to go through a process with our board. In my time on the board, we haven't actually had to deal with any of those issues. We have had to deal with some secret type 1 projects, but I see your point, but I'm confident that we will accommodate that with this database, which we'll also have available on our website.
Okay, and as I say, it's been a long time since I've been actively involved in preservation management and regulations, and I am far from up to speed on what's considered good practice now. Again, I'm not sure why that bit of information is a downside, in addition to having the explanations, which I think are important. A dotted line seems to me, I don't know, I think documents related to preservation and zoning and any kind of policing regulation of the municipality ought to be as informative and easy to understand as possible. And they are legal documents. And so I just, again, it's a concern I have. It may be very overblown because I come from a different era, and in almost everything. And so I'm just sharing that with you. And when do we hit the 63 days for the village board?
That is a good question. I'd have to look at a calendar.
Okay.
This was presented at the December meeting, I believe.
Yeah, it was December 14th.
December 14th, yes. So I would reckon that puts us somewhere around February 14th or thereabouts.
Yeah, the February meeting. Okay, so Yaslin, Matthew, do you have any thoughts about this at this point?
I mean, while I share the same curiosity about the about the national and historic, it's certainly nothing that I know of, nor do I think it's really a purview of the planning board, or that we could really add much, or should add much. But one question I would have is a question of process. What was the process of notification of homeowners, property owners that would be impacted by this? Were they notified by certified return receipt? Were they made well aware of what was going on? And were there any objections to, did they feel there was any hardship or anything with the changes that you're proposing? You're not adding anything, right? You're just cleaning up property lines of existing properties. You're not expanding the district. You're not contracting the district. You're basically just cleaning up, right?
Yes, we
Okay.
are clarifying previous failings of the 1999 interpretation of the map. So again, our 1976 map remains the same. The legal basis for our nomination remains the same and will be kept in Albany. This is essentially a finding tool that we provide to help people understand whether or not they fall under the purview of our board, which is why, I mean, I don't know if Jack shared it with you all, but the 76 map was drawn by hand. It's rendered beautifully, but I mean, it really looks like it was drawn on like a cocktail napkin. So this has lot line.
Impossible to read.
There's also a giant watermark on our only copy of it. So this is just a tool to help people determine whether or not, they are in the district. As far as notification, when we first began the process, we were required to contact the subject property owners by certified mail. That had to happen to just let them know that this process was underway, because no work can be done while the process is underway. We then had a public hearing. The public hearing stayed open, which again, we had to contact them all. The public hearing stayed open for a couple of weeks just because of how it fell around the holidays. We had signs posted on all of the subject properties. We, I think between Jeff and I, we spoke to all of the property owners between the two of us. A lot of people called with questions. None of them came to the public hearing in opposition, and none of the conversations that I had with any of them was anybody opposed. We had one member of the public who attended the public hearing, who was not a property owner, who was a neighbor, but not an owner of one of the subject properties. And that was specifically to talk about 27 Marion. So we followed the process as far as notification is concerned.
Great. And so, and you did get confirmation that everybody that was impacted was notified. Great.
Yes, we did the green card.
Yeah, I mean, just in a common world, it's the earlier people talk and the more communication there is, the less problems we have downstream. So that's all I have. Thanks.
Yaslin, any questions?
Very minor, but I do want to say that I think obviously a lot of work has gone into this, and it's obvious that you all have thought through this a lot. So I want you to know that's definitely has not gone unnoticed. And for me, having gone through these documents, it was very clear and understandable to me, all the rationale and all of the things that you put in there, you know, definitely were in line with the requirements for code. So thank you for that. Just very, maybe a little nitpicky, just a question for you. I don't see 27 Marion on the, like the number 27 on Marion that shows that it's no longer in the district. And then the only other thing besides that is the Foundry Preserve. I noticed that you have all these really great, like large, like Forge Gate and other large areas labeled. I'm curious if you might wanna, even though it's kind of obvious, you know, to us where Foundry Preserve is, maybe in just being consistent with some of your titles and labeling, you might wanna label that as well.
Okay, yeah, we actually removed all of the labels except for the streets themselves. So the reason why Forge Gate is called out is just because that street's called Forge Gate Drive, and Butterfield Road is called out because that's the name of the road. So we actually made a decision to remove all of the, because on the previous maps, some of the churches were labeled and there were some other things to kind of help people understand where they were, and we removed everything but the street names. So that's the background of that. As far as the 27 Marion is concerned, there are two maps that you should have received. One is labeled large, one's labeled small. The small map doesn't have any of the addresses on it because it's designed to be printed at 8x10. The large map is designed to be printed at 11x17, and because of how these are rendered through the GIS program, we do have a little bit of a inability to mess with any of the street addresses. So if that is one which is missing an address, it is just because of the data set that was provided by the county. And unfortunately, there are a few things that we can change, but that's not one of them. And actually, you know what? I'm looking at this right now and I'm seeing, I was looking at the small map and now I'm looking at the big map, and I see that we do have those things labeled: Forge Gate, Springbrook, Chestnut Ridge, and Butterfield. And I will see about 17 Marion. I'm sorry, 27 Marion. If I zoom in, that it might just be one of the lots where you could, one of the other things too, you can see how the street numbers are not necessarily in a consistent place along the lot lines. That's, again, is just how the map is generated through GIS. And yet it looks like 27 isn't labeled.
And the only reason why it's kind of called out to me is because someone in the public hearing mentioned it, and then it's also in your report. And then when you go to the map, you're like, oh, let's see where it is to see how it's left out. And then you don't find it. So
yeah, because it's missing the label.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are, after the adoption of the map, hopefully after the trustees adopt the map, hoping that they will, we have requested that we have an opportunity to give it a sort of final
Yeah.
copy edit. So if that is something which needs to be added manually, it's something that I can speak to the GIS officer about.
Cool. Like I said, it was nitpicky, not required.
Okay, Sean, thank you. Just for the record, in going back to something Matthew said, we do have purview over this because part of the review process under the HDRB part of the code is the reference to the planning board by the village board of trustees. So we're actually responding to them, a referral from them to us for the comments. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing it.
No, I understand that. Thanks.
Okay.
The comment piece.
Sean, if we can ask you to be patient for a response until the next meeting as well, which is within, well, you're done. But we'll ask the village board of trustees to be patient until the next, until our next meeting, because I at least would like to think a little bit more about this whole issue. About, how much information it's useful to give the public. And actually with Yaslin's raising the boundary preserve, that's now a National Historic Landmark, is it not?
It is. It actually predates the historic district. I'm sorry. The state designation predates our historic district.
Yeah.
The national designation was more recent.
And that's a National Historic Archaeological Site, is it? Or
I don't know whether, I know it's a national landmark site. I don't know if they distinguish it as being a archaeological site or how it's actually designated. I just know that previously it was on the state register.
All
That's
right.
actually another thing too, just in the report that we called out, our previous map only included the portion of it that was below 9D. That has been a long-standing error of the map, which was something else that we corrected. That lot has always been a single tax parcel, and it was just incorrectly labeled on our previous maps.
Okay, well, thank you very much for explaining that all. I'm a lot more clear on it all, not because the presentation materials weren't good, but again, I'm trying to play catch up in terms of existing or current practices and things like that. So,
Sure.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'd like to note that Sue has joined. Have you been on the meeting the whole time, Sue? You're on mute. You have to unmute, Sue.
Unmute.
Ah. Can we hear you? No.
How about that?
Yes.
There you go.
No, I have not been. I have been trying, and it says the host will let you in soon.
Oh, I
Since 7 o'clock.
apologize. I apologize, Sue. I didn't know that was your ID.
Okay, since
I'm
7
so
o'clock,
sorry.
I don't know. I've been sitting here. I'm texting everybody saying, anybody
No,
there? I thought
I'm
there is a
so
problem.
sorry.
I
I'm
sent
so
emails.
sorry.
But anyway, I figure from the last few minutes, I figured that was on the historical map. Or the person who was just talking the last few minutes, but I wasn't. I just joined in when I waved. That's how I could get in.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
But anyway, so the West Point Foundry was National Archaeological
It was,
site.
okay.
Yes, that was official a few weeks ago. we went to see that. But I missed the front part of the meeting. I'm sorry, but
No, you don't have to apologize.
no, but I would like to know what is going on.
Well, I'm happy to fill you in on what went on.
Okay,
The other,
I'll catch up
the,
with.
for one thing, we thank Matt Francisco for his chairmanship of these past years, and we
Will do.
welcome Yaslin. And we had a pretty targeted discussion on Butterfield, and we're going to take it up again at our next meeting. Okay.
Okay.
And I can have, more of a conversation with you about it in detail,
All right, thank you.
if you like. And the video will be posted whenever we post our videos.
So we don't have other members, just us?
No, we had Matt and myself and Yaslin and you. I never heard from Laura, so I assume she was not coming, but our quorum is 3. And
Okay.
so we were able to conduct business. I'm very sorry about that. So won't happen again.
No, it's okay, because if the ID is not clear, so I'm not letting.
All right, you're allowed your ID.
Okay.
All right, moving on. I think we have next the approval of the minutes, and Yaslin and I obviously have to, abstain from this because we weren't at those meetings. So I honestly don't know whether that means we have a quorum to approve them. Do
We
you?
don't,
I don't
don't.
think so. If we only got 2 people then.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
we need all 3 of us, right?
Okay, all right, then we'll put that off until the next meeting as well. Okay. Yeah,
Did you, is there an update on 40 Main?
Yes, there is. I'm sorry.
We're past 60 days for the
Yeah.
planning boards.
Yep, there is, thank you. So just yesterday or the day before, I received a summary of where we stand, and a letter has gone from the village attorney to the applicant, the property owner, explaining that for a variety of reasons, the clock was missed, and that the village trustees approved in principle the general terms that had been discussed of using the village parking lot. And John First has been asked to, as quickly as possible, produce a draft letter that memorializes the specifics and get it to the applicant. The applicant was contacted and asked if they would permit an extension of the days, as you rightly point out, 63 days, and he's agreed to that. And so as soon as the 2 parties have agreed on the language of the agreement, it will come to us. And whether that will be at the end of the month meeting or at the February meeting, I can't say. I would hope it would be at the end of the month meeting because it's gone on for too long.
Jack, are you referring to the resolution 88/2021, the thing that was signed on December 14th of
Yes.
last year? That's the thing that they are going to review okay, got it.
Yeah,
Thank
they're
you.
going to flesh it out and send it to the party. There will be a conversation that takes place, which is perfectly appropriate as long as it's within the parameters of that
Okay.
resolution.
The only issue is that the timing had run out, so now.
That's correct.
Got it,
And then we will also need a change to the parking map, and that will all come to us. Okay. Thank you for
No
reminding me. All right, well, oh, yeah, that was the old business that I was gonna speak. Okay, so if there are no more questions or comments, if I could have a, what's it called, a resolution to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn, so moved.
Motion to adjourn, and a second, please.
Second.
Second by Sue. Then the meeting's adjourned at 8:21, and thank you all very much.
Okay, sorry, I
Have a
missed
good night.
most of
Thank you.
the
Have a good
meeting.
night.
Have a good night. Nice to meet you, Yaslin.
Nice to meet you too, Sue. We'll talk
Sorry
soon.
again, Stu. Now I'll know who you are getting on.
Well, to that, Karen, are we not letting people in if we don't
There
know
was
their
one guy-
IDs?
Well, I did let one guy in and he left, so I don't know what happened to him, but.
Yeah, because how
and
do we let,
every-
how's the
and every-
public getting in?
Well, the way that it's set up on here, it has all these participants and then people in the waiting room. So depending on what was their area of interest, you know, whether it was Butterfield or whatever. And I don't know what Mike, whoever Mike is, was interested in. And I got so busy writing, I didn't notice the JHMB 8,
Yeah,
which ended up to be Sue. So that was my error, but
okay. Because
let the other
I
person
got
in.
so worried. I
I'm
left
so
2
sorry.
messages with Matt.
Oh,
I
on my
sent-
cell phone?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I don't have my,
I sent a
I'm in a
email-
meeting, Sue.
I sent an email to everybody, assuming somebody will look at their phone.
Oh,
Oh, no, this one was a little fast and furious. This one,
Okay.
there's really no,
I'm so sorry.
That's
Oh
but
my God.
Karen, I don't know. I mean, just for my own edification, Jack can chime in as the chair, but this should be an open room anyway, because if we all meet at
Absolutely.
Village Hall, everybody's sitting in the chairs listening to everything. So there's no need to identify between the two, and anybody should get in. Now, somebody could get disruptive, and then, somebody might ask to do something, but, Jack, if you can speak to this, because
No.
Yeah, no.
100%. I agree 100%.
I agree with you. I agree with you. And I had let the other person in way at the beginning of the
Okay.
meeting. And I was so busy taking notes that I hadn't looked back to see Sue's ID up there. So I let her in. And then when I saw the video,
Understood. Okay. No. I think we're all clear now. I just wanted
Yeah.
to,
No, that
I
was
just,
my error.
yeah. Sorry, I missed the meeting, but it's all right. As long as I know that I wasn't really wrong. I thought I got something wrong in my head. I said, is there
No,
anything wrong? Maybe
no.
technical? Can't be. I said, this is the link from 7:02 to now. So I'm just,
Sorry. Oh my
that's all
God.
right. Yeah. Anyway, so another thing is I don't have anybody's phone number except for Matt's phone number. So I think in case there's something wrong, maybe there should be a.
I thought Jack provided it in the email.
Yeah, check Sue, check in the email that I sent you with the agenda. A little bit,
I have the agenda.
yeah, a little bit
that.
down in the email. I gave you my cell phone number there.
Okay. Well.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll check again, but I want to say anyway. But Matt's number is the only one I have.
Oh,
So
yeah, and I didn't have that with, I'm using my business phone right now.
this is what I'm saying. I said maybe send a text. So I asked Joe to send you a text, but I realized you're in the meeting. I think somebody. maybe
Otherwise detained.
I know. All right. Anyway, nice
Okay.
meeting, Yaselin, and thank you, Jack, for the previous talk, and thank you, Matt, for being the chairman for the past whatever years.
Whatever, indeed. All right, thanks so much.
Okay.
Bye, everybody. Have a
Have a good night. Be well,
night.
stay safe.
Okay. So.